It's the All Things Strange podcast. I am your host, Agent Anderson. Come along as we examine UFO sightings, conspiracies, and all things strange. You can find all of our wonderful links in the description on the Linktree, where you can find our Discord, our Patreon, our merchandise, and more. This week's episode, Siege at Honobia. It's spelled Honobia, which makes me want to say Honobia, but I think it's pronounced Honobia. I've heard people say it that way, so I'm going to go with it. Before we get started, check out our Patreon. We've got two wonderful tiers for you. The first tier, coming in at $3, will get you early access, after hours, and bonus episodes. And if you'd like to upgrade to the $5 tier, you get the ability to vote on upcoming topics such as this one. This time around, they chose this over the conspiracy of fake honey and olive oil. Is your olive oil fake? Is your honey fake? Well, we'll never know because they voted on this one instead. The Siege at Honobia. All right, so the Siege at Honobia. This one might not take the full hour. It probably won't. So I'll talk about a couple of other sightings in the area. Bigfoot type stuff if we have extra time. But let's get to it. Honobia, or Honobia, however you want to say it, I'll just go with Honobia, is in Oklahoma. And this event happened on, well, roughly speaking, January of 2000, but it wasn't limited to just January, and we'll get into the details a little bit on that. Oklahoma, in case you're not familiar, or those of you who are international listeners, is just north of Texas, and it's the state that kind of looks like a meat cleaver a little bit. At least that's how I always thought of it. Oklahoma, in general, is apparently a hotbed of Bigfoot activity, and it's similar to the Pacific Northwest. There's a lot of foresty, remote areas, and a lot of Bigfoot sightings. Honobia itself is an area in the mountains towards the east part of the state, and there's not a whole lot in the area. It's pretty remote. It's perfect for hunting and camping and outdoors activities, but I've read online that it's about an hour from the closest grocery store. So if you like civilization, probably not the thing for you. Personally, I believe that people belong indoors, not outdoors. There's stuff out there, man. There's like bears and mosquitoes and ticks. We weren't meant for that. You know? At least not me. Maybe some people were. But yeah, it's a pretty remote area. And this case centers around the Humphrey family, who has land in the area. Depending on how you want to refer to it, it's like a homestead or whatever. They have several acres and like a house or a cabin way out there in the middle of nowhere. Now, interestingly enough, this case was also investigated by the BFRO, the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. And that's where we get most of our information from for this case. Maybe I don't think I want to quote it too much during the episode, but maybe to the after hours, I'll go over some more specifics from their report. And if you're not a Patreon subscriber and you don't have the after hours, you can very easily find this online and look at the whole article about it by simply searching for BFRO Siege at Honobia. They have a whole article for it. There's a couple of other sources of information out there, but they all seem to be just more or less regurgitating the BFRO report. So this is not one of those ones where we have like a super widespread information base. But on the other hand, we did have somebody go and investigate it, so that's cool. So although the main event is generally considered to be in January of 2000, it goes back probably all the way back to 1998. The family said that they had seen activity both during the day and at night, and they weren't really sure what it was. They would kind of see something in the distance, and they didn't, at first weren't saying that it was Bigfoot necessarily. So they had some weird stuff going on for 2 years, mostly at night, but also sometimes during the day. And over time, the activity would change a little bit. Originally, they would just see stuff in the distance, and then at some point, they started hearing activity immediately outside of their house. And at some point, the activity escalated to banging on windows and trying to open doors and get into the house. One theory as to why there was such a large number of sightings in this area, specifically on their land, was that there was a lot of deer on the land. The family planted Austrian snow peas on purpose to attract deer so that they could hunt the deer. So they hunted the deer, and then they would store them in a shed outside for, I don't know, I guess, I've never hunted. I don't know what the process is, but from what I understand, you'll hang the meat out there to prepare it, maybe to dry it out a little bit or to age it. I don't know. But they would hang it out in a shed. And once in a while, and increasing over time, they'd have deer carcasses go missing from the shed. And at one point, they had all of them go missing at once. I think, if I remember correctly, I didn't take notes specifically on this, but I think they had like 5 deer carcasses in there, and they all disappeared in the same night. So over time, the activity escalated, and by January 2000, the monsters, as the family called them, were tapping on the outside of the house and even stooping to look into windows. They were very tall. The family contacted the BFRO to report the activity, and the uncle, I guess, called them the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, or reported to them, saying that something big and upright was visiting at night. Here's part of the report that he sent in. Quote, "Too many incidents to mention here. Please have someone contact us. This is no hoax, and my brother is afraid for his family. This creature is getting bolder every time it returns. This thing is huge, walks upright, smells like a musty urine, burned hair type odor. He repeatedly comes back in the early morning hours after midnight and harasses them until just before dawn. It has on more than one occasion tried to enter the home. We don't know where to turn. Everyone thinks we are crazy when we mention it. Please, we don't know what to do, but I do know that something needs to be done. There are stories we could tell that would make the hair stand on your neck." And just imagine that you're in a remote cabin, more or less in the middle of nowhere. I don't think it's said anywhere, but I get the impression their closest neighbor is probably several miles away, maybe further. So there's nobody else out there. It's just you. You might as well be on the moon. And you're out there, and at nighttime, there's all this activity around your house, whether it's walking footsteps. I mean, that alone is pretty creepy. But like banging on your windows and somebody trying to open your door? No, thank you. And of course, when they're trying to enter the house, you have to wonder if this was Bigfoot and not some kind of hoaxer or locals, maybe somebody living in the woods or something. Bigfoots should be really, really strong. So why didn't they just rip the door down or bust through a window? I don't know. Maybe there's a good answer for that, but I'm not sure what it would be. So the report said that they walked on the porch, fiddled with the doorknob, and pulled at parts of the window. And the wife got really scared and no longer wanted to stay at the cabin with the rest of the family. So she left with her kids and went somewhere else. And the men folks stayed behind to deal with the monster, not live with the monster, to deal with the monster. I don't know what they were thinking, but if this was going on, I would take all my belongings, anything important to me, set the house on fire, and never return. Just gone. I'm never coming back. Not worth it. But hey, maybe these are hardier folk than I am. Another interesting detail is that while the monster or monsters were, as they called them, they didn't necessarily call them Bigfoot right away, but as they were near the house, the family would often hear strange noises in the distance, such as like screaming and hooting and howling noises. that are similar to other descriptions of Bigfoot noises that I've heard about before or read about before. And this would indicate that we're not talking about one creature or possibly two creatures, but possibly a whole family of creatures. So the men, they had weapons, they had rifles, as you would expect for them hunting, unless they're bow hunting, but apparently they were not. They were gun hunting. They stayed behind, and the father, Tim, shot one of the animals. He shot at it. He saw something in the distance about 70 yards away at night, and he shot at it. He wasn't 100% sure what he was shooting at, according to some accounts, but other accounts, the father says, yes, 100% that was a Bigfoot, and I was shooting at it. Now, that may seem a little extreme, but keep in mind, these people were in fear of their lives, and they had the perception of being attacked. They wanted to drive these creatures away and prevent them from possibly getting in and killing somebody. So he shot at the thing, and he didn't know whether or not he hit it because it was dark and it was far away. But the next morning when he went out, he found a trail of blood in the area where he shot at the creature. And by some accounts, there was blood and even some other matter, possibly brain matter in the area. Of course, if it got shot in the brain, how did it escape? It probably would have died right away, you would imagine, but I don't know. One of the things of this case is there are different versions available, so you kind of have to, do your best educated guess. I think probably the best version is the BFRO version, because that's, somebody actually went to investigate it, so it's probably a little bit better than some random blog or YouTube video that you might find. So one of the BFRO investigators, this was the day before they reported it to BFRO, they shot at this thing. One of the investigators came to collect a sample, but on the BFRO website, it's not clear whether or not a sample was collected, and if it was, whether or not it was tested or analyzed in some way. The BFRO thought that it was more likely to be a deer that was shot at rather than a Bigfoot. And I mean, that kind of checks out a little bit. I think that is plausible. I'm not saying that's the explanation, but I think it's worth considering different angles. If you are freaked out and you see some eyeballs in the distance and then you see some motion, you might be inclined to take a shot at that, whatever it may be. And if you're already freaked out of your mind, then you might see something and interpret it differently than what it really is through a lens of fear. So you might see a deer and think, okay, well, that must be one of the monsters. I better shoot at it. And I have personal experience with this. We live in an area where in our neighborhood, not like next to my house, but if you go a couple blocks away, there's this big field that's like sort of like a nature preserve, although it's not like a real nature preserve because it's only, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 acres. It's not that big, but it's sort of untouched, right? They keep it cleared or mowed down because they have to, but people are not supposed to go in there. So there's a family of deer that live in this field, and depending on how lucky you are, you can see them there during the daytime even. They'll just be chilling. Usually during the day, they'll be laying down in the grass, and you could see, if you're at the right time of year, you could see the little baby deer hanging around with their family. It's super cute. But at nighttime, they actually move around, and sometimes we'll bring a flashlight. We'll go on nighttime walks, and we'll walk by this field, and I'll shine my flashlight over there, and it's far enough away so that you can't really see what it is, but the eyes will reflect the light from your flashlight. And the first time I did this, it was really creepy. I was like, oh my God, what is that? And then my son's like, oh, it's just a deer probably. I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. It's just one of those deers that's always hanging out here. But it looks really spooky. And we were not even spooked out because of being attacked at the time. We were just on a walk that we go on fairly regularly. Just the other night, we were on a walk past the field, and I saw at a house not that far away. It was, maybe 50 feet away or 100 feet away. So pretty close. And I saw a shadow moving over there that appeared to be about the size of a deer, but it was really dark out. and we have some street lights here, but this was kind of between street lights and the house was not really illuminated. And it looked like the deer was running across the street and towards the house. But when we got to the house, I didn't see anything. It was almost like it vanished into thin air. What I think happened is it kind of snuck onto the side of the house, and I think there's a path that goes to like a foresty kind of strip behind the house. So I'm guessing that's what happened, is the deer went back there. Or it could have just been in my imagination, who knows. But it's pretty creepy, even though it's just a harmless deer. They're pretty strong animals, and if you caught one by surprise and pissed them off, they might ruin your day at the very least. But no, they usually run from you. They don't stick around. But it was just kind of an interesting experience because I saw this shadow of something out of the corner of my eye that I'm pretty sure was a deer. And when you get there, it's gone. But when you first see it out of the corner of your eye, you have like this instinctual fear response of something that's unknown. And then once you have time to process it, you're like, oh, okay, wait, that was just a deer, nothing to worry about. But still, it's kind of weird. So I can see how you could see something in the distance and not really understand what it was and think that it was something different than what it was. All right, I don't know if any of that made sense, but long story short, we got deer hanging out in our neighborhood sometimes. After they shot the deer, Tim and Michael said that they heard animal sounds that were vocalizing on the nearby hillside for hours that night. And that would indicate that it wasn't a deer, because I've never actually heard a deer vocalize. I'm sure they can, but the ones around here, they're pretty silent. They're really stealthy, and they actually blend into the surroundings really well. If they're not moving, it's real easy to miss them. So that kind of makes me think, okay, maybe it wasn't a deer. Who knows? Some BFRO members, like I said, investigated this, and there's a couple of different people involved. One of them spoke with Tim and Michael on the phone before traveling, and here's what they said on the phone, or here's what they reported about that conversation. I finally spoke with the shooter last night. When I spoke with him directly, I got the facts straight about the situation at the house and the blood. The shooter is named Tim. His brother, the one who originally contacted us, is named Michael. Tim says it was definitely a Bigfoot that he shot at, and thought he might have hit it. It was approximately 70 yards away at night. There is a trail of blood in the woods, but it leads to the fresh deer kill, not away from the area where the Bigfoot was standing when he fired at it. Tim says the Bigfoot ran after he shot at it, but then he and his brother could hear it and others on the hillside for several hours after the shooting. That suggests to me that he didn't even wound it, and all the blood is from the deer. Miles and Roger will be there in a few hours and see all this for themselves and thoroughly look over the area. They will be armed. Roger's father, a very skilled 72-year-old bear hunter, will remain at the property, possibly for a few days. Tim says he doesn't care what we do there, but if the animal comes back to the house and scratches at the window again, he will go out and try to kill it. He's had to send his kids to stay with relatives, and he and his wife are clearly terrified. The volunteer, Roger Roberts, is a well-respected veteran, private investigator in Oklahoma. He was in the military intelligence in Vietnam, then a police officer for many years in Oklahoma before becoming a private investigator. He's on a first-name basis with law enforcement officials throughout Oklahoma and is very familiar with every jurisdiction. Both Miles and I were very impressed by him after speaking with him at length on the phone. Roger chuckled when I said we were wondering why Tim hasn't called the police about this. Roger said there are hardly any sheriffs in this area because there's a lot of weed growing in southern Oklahoma, and the federal government routinely does unannounced sweeps and arrests crooked deputies. The backwoods people do not talk to police if they can help it. Backwoods, not backwards. The backwoods people do not talk to police if they can help it. Roger says this is the norm for southeastern Oklahoma, firmly rooted over generations. Tim wants us to take care of his problem. He doesn't want the Bigfoot coming back to his house anymore and he doesn't care what it takes to make it stop. He will not move and not hold back from shooting at it if it returns. I told him that we're sending some people who will help him figure out what should be done. I said the bear hunter will shoot it if there's no other way to handle it, but in any case, to let us handle it. There may be no other way to handle it because tranquilizing it would be, as we learned last year, basically impossible to arrange, especially if it needs to be done within a few weeks. This game may be over much sooner than thought. The presence of more people with rifles at the location will be the best deterrent to the animal, whatever it is, while the situation is being assessed and we're recording audio and video there. We have always known that, in the natural course of things, there would someday be an overly aggressive Bigfoot that would get itself killed by someone protecting his family or property. This may be the one, inevitably. And that's from the researcher Matt. Just a couple of thoughts here. It's rumored, well, there's reports where it appears that big feet are aware of firearms and what they are capable of. So if you have more people there, that could drive them away just by seeing that there are people with rifles. So that in and of itself could be a deterrent. And also, there are stories of Bigfoots carrying off their dead. It's unclear whether or not they bury them or do something else with them, but it has been reported before that they carry off their dead, and that could explain any lack of forensic evidence that has yet to be found. As far as I'm aware, there have been no Bigfoot bodies recovered thus far. So the investigators, they went out. There were two of them. They went out to the house to investigate. They inspected the properties and looked around, and they looked at deer carcass remains. I guess carcasses were left, half eaten, like that kind of a thing. And they also listened for vocalizations, and they brought video equipment. At one point, they did see eye reflections through the trees and heard movement, although they were unable to get any definitive video evidence, unfortunately. While the investigators were there, the family heard noises and shot from the porch towards where they thought the targets were, although at this time there were no visible targets confirmed. And I read somewhere else that the investigators were sleeping in their car, not in the house. Which, I mean, come on, man. These things are attacking. You don't want to be out in your car. It's like a tin can waiting to be crushed. After the investigation, the BFRO suggested that the deer meat that they were storing in their shed and the deer population in general were probably attracting the creatures. Now, there's some different ideas out there. I'm not a Bigfoot expert, but based on what I've read, there's different ideas. But in general, Bigfoot is believed to be a carnivore or omnivore. Omnivore would probably make more sense. But it is believed that they are meat eaters, and there are plenty of witness reports throughout the years demonstrating that they will eat meat. So the deer could have been attracting the big feet to that area. And especially if you hunt them and leave them hanging up in an easily accessible shed, free lunch, right? So the family removed the deer from the area. I guess they got rid of the peas, and after they were successful to have less deer on their property, over time the encounters dropped away and eventually stopped. They still heard vocalizations off in the distance, but the animals did not attempt to enter the home after they got rid of some of the, the deer carcasses that they were storing in the shed and stuff like that. Now, as I said before, I think I said, after the shooting incident, the big feet became more aggressive and tried harder to get into the house. Maybe they were angry because one of their own was shot, or maybe they were just being aggressive because they had been attacked. Fight or flight. Sometimes you flight, sometimes you fight. As far as I can tell, the family has not sought media attention. They have not attempted to monetize the events with books or movies. And that's not necessarily evidence in and of itself. And it's possible that there are things in the works, or that they did attempt to do things like this and it fell through, or maybe they published a book and I'm just not aware of it. But if they haven't tried to capitalize on the events, that makes the events a little bit more believable. Although in and of itself, it's not evidence, because I got to admit, if I had something strange happen to me and I had the opportunity to make money on it, why not? It's not like I'm Mr. Moneybags over here. So if you have a chance to make an extra buck, I wouldn't turn that down. I mean, I wouldn't be worried about, oh no, if I make some money on this, people won't believe me. I'd be like, well, they're not going to believe me either way. So might as well make a few extra bucks and send my kids to college or something, right? On the other hand, there are some questions surrounding the case. If this activity went on for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, there should be some really good evidence, such as DNA samples. I mean, if they were often around the house, tapping on windows and that kind of a thing, wouldn't they have left fur behind or other evidence behind? And if they were repeatedly visiting so much, wouldn't there be photographic evidence? I've heard conflicting reports on this. I've heard that the family did capture photos and videos, but they don't want to release them because they kind of just don't want to deal with it. But I've also heard that they were never able to capture anything reliable. But I don't know. I feel like if there was years of activity, I mean, at some point, wouldn't you go buy like a nighttime camera? Like in the year 2000, I don't think it would have been too difficult to get a consumer grade camera that could have a nighttime mode and get a picture of one of these things when they're up close to the house. Wait till it's on your porch, look out the window, snap a picture, right? I don't know. And that it just seems to me that that's kind of a big hole in the story. The family did say that they bought floodlights for around the house so they could see the areas around the house, hoping that it would be a deterrent. And I did read about one incident where the lights were kind of turned upwards when they woke up in the morning, kind of like the Bigfoot didn't like it, so they turned them up so that they could still conceal themselves in darkness. So that's one possibility, but who knows? It's an interesting story, but we don't have multiple sources of information. We basically just have the BFRO report, and maybe I missed it, but I was not able to find a whole lot of like interviews or anything like that. So for this one, I don't know, there's really not a whole lot to go on, but it's an interesting story, and I find it fascinating. And I think that over time, it's possible that we may have the witnesses elaborate on what they saw, or maybe provide some video evidence that they captured. I'm hoping that, what I read about them having the evidence and then not wanting to release it because I didn't want to deal with it, I'm hoping that's true. But, on the other hand, shit or get off the pot, put up or shut up. I don't know, however you want to say it. Don't say that you have evidence and then don't provide the evidence. So who knows? It's a really interesting case, and I hope to find out more about it in the future. All right, well, let's get to some more Bigfoot reports from the area. Another report from the year 2000 from the area, from Laflore County, which is where... Now, I'm not sure if Honobia is in Laflore County or the neighboring county. I read it's between those two, is what it says on Wikipedia. Whatever that means, I don't know. But it's generally in this area. So here's a report from the year 2000 from the wintertime in January, from January 28th. So this would be right around the time of... Well, actually, no, this report was... Okay, so this was reported, submitted on January 28th, 2000, but this actually happened much earlier, so ignore that. Way earlier. So here's the statement. In July of 1983, I worked for the timber company driving a 1-ton truck pulling a 1,200-gallon tanker in the Honobia Pickens area. On trip back to our facility, a very large, hairy creature ran across the road in front of me. I came within a few feet of running over it. It did not stop, and it just kept on running. It was approximately 7 feet tall. The upper torso of its body was a brownish color, and the lower was a lighter color. One of the things I particularly noticed was no shoes. My first thought was someone's pulling a prank. I soon realized that couldn't be, not up here in these mountainous forests. No houses for miles. I was told by phone by a relative that 3 large man-like hairy creatures were observed on a person's porch and a yard. The man got his SKS and has allegedly shot at one. My relative also told me that contractors who plant young pine seedlings are refusing to go near Honobia and plant trees. Today, January 28, 2000, we have had a very heavy snow, and while I was home listening to the scanner, I overheard a conversation between 2 Oklahoma game wardens talking about the incident. One told the other to be on the lookout for large, man-like, hairy creatures. They seemed very serious. They were talking about the same incident that I have mentioned above. This area is called the Honobia Wildlife Area and is very, very sparsely inhabited. The area of 875,000 acres is owned by a large timber company, and as the loggers move in to cut, there are sightings. And that's the report. Pretty interesting report from all the way back in 1983. And it's pretty open and shut as far as what the guy's describing here. Either it was a Bigfoot or he's lying. And there's no way to know for sure, but it's an interesting report. I think that it is possible for it to be a hoax. I think even in a remote area, there are people who would wait around for hours and hours on end on a road where they know sooner or later somebody's going to drive by. Although I wouldn't imagine somebody would slowly walk in front of a moving vehicle. I don't know. You never know what people will do for a hoax, but I wouldn't rule that out entirely. I think that is a possibility, but maybe not the most likely scenario. Still pretty interesting though. All right, here's another report from the same general area submitted on July 3, 2000. And this one happened on July 1st. Same general area. It was near Highway 144 east of Octavia at New Big Eagle Fork Bridge, south on Big Eagle Fork 300 meters approximately, but north of Bluff. So not exactly, but roughly the same area. And the nearest town, Octavia. Observed, I was fishing the creek that runs through my mother's property with a lure. I was just downstream of the fork and the creek that goes to your left as you're going downstream. My wife, children, mother, sister, and brother-in-law were swimming and fishing about 500 feet upstream at our swimming hole. I had been noticing that my lure was running funny and was looking at it trying to fix it before making another cast. Downstream from my position, the creek makes a slight curve to the right. I was standing on rocks, as close to the water's edge as I could, fishing in the fast water just below the rapids. After messing with my lure, I looked up toward downstream to make another cast. When I did, I distinctly saw the legs from the mid-thigh area down. My vision was impeded of seeing anything higher than that because of the tree limbs, of what I thought at the time was a man, another fisherman, about 50 feet away. It was in full stride, in the edge of the water, walking out of the water onto the bank at the right. I saw it take 2 steps, one from my left to my right, and another diagonally away from me, disappearing into the thicket. I remember thinking, there's another fisherman down there, and continued to fish while looking to see where they went. The foliage on both sides of the creek is extremely dense in that area. Having grown up visiting my grandparents and later my parents in that area, and being very familiar with the terrain and forestation from hunting it and fishing it my whole life, I was surprised to see anyone there, that far from the bridge for several reasons. One, it was over 1,000 feet downstream from the bridge, and there was no car parked anywhere near the bridge. 2, we had been swimming and fishing for over an hour before I had the encounter, and there was no one fishing by while we were there. 3, there is no residence or access by road anyone or anywhere nearer than the upstream bridge. 4, the terrain is extremely rugged, full of underbrush, including a thick maze of briars and poison ivy, and from experience, anyone who is there is either fishing up or downstream. 5, the trek up or downstream is rugged and time-consuming to travail, causing one to wade, cross at fast water areas, and walk in the water on slick, mossy rocks. There's nothing that would bring one to that remote area unless they were fishing. As a result, I made about 3 more casts while intently watching to see this other fisherman to reappear. He never did. I began to get a little spooked while thinking, what did I just see? I walked on downstream looking intently for what I saw to reappear either downstream or on the bank area where I saw it disappear. Nothing. I couldn't hear any sound other than the rapids behind me. It would have been hard to carry on a conversation where I was standing when I saw it. I began to second-guess myself when I couldn't see anybody or anything. Then I realized if I saw what I thought I saw, there will be water on the rocks and bank at the edge. Even though I was spooked, I decided I had to investigate any traces of something leaving the water. I waded down to where I saw it leave the water, and sure enough, there was a wet footprint on a big rock and several sprinkles on other rocks and dirt on the banks. I peered into the thicket and saw nothing but a faint trail to the other fork of the creek, probably only about 30 feet away. I decided I had seen enough, and was sure that whatever it was there close watching me. I hightailed it back upstream to where my family was still swimming and told them the story. It wasn't until then that my mother told me about the recent sighting at Honobia, which is only about 9 miles west. Okay, so this is like really close to Honobia. I'd like to mention here that I never really believed there was any credibility in the Bigfoot sighting stories, but I was quickly convincing myself that what I saw wasn't human. When I saw it, and I only saw it for a second, I thought it was someone who was wearing dark navy blue overalls. The legs were a consistent diameter from top to bottom, and I saw no indication of a human-like foot. The pants legs extended over a person's shoe. I saw no distinction in color. It looked like a solid dark blue or black. My sister and brother-in-law had a video camera on the bank, and the 3 of us decided to go back to the spot to see if we could get something on tape. All we got was video of the still wet rocks and some disturbed soil where some rocks had been embedded in the dirt. It appeared that something had been sitting there. You could see indentations of where rock had been in the dirt, and in the bottom of the indentations the dirt was still damp-looking, providing it hadn't been that way long. I also found a length of dung, which we videoed, that looked something like coyote, only bigger in diameter than I had ever seen before from a coyote. My sister and her husband agreed with me that no human would bust through that thicket just to visit the creek. So I don't know if I want to search for the video of the poo. Oh my God, it's a big giant turd. So that was the report, and there was a follow-up investigation by BRFO or BFRO. The follow-up investigation was by Roger Roberts and David Wilbanks. In response to the report from Octavia, Oklahoma, on July 1st, a follow-up investigation was conducted by David Wilbanks and Roger Roberts. Mr. Roberts conducted the initial telephone interview with the witness, J.B. Mr. Roberts concluded during the interview that he was both sincere and credible. Based on this interview information, Mr. Roberts asked David Wilbanks to make a search of the area in question. On July 9, 2000, approximately 1200 hours, Mr. Wilbanks conducted a search of the area using specific directions provided by the witness. The terrain was difficult, with the creek being clear and mostly shallow, with moss-covered rocks. There was a set of rapids on the eastern leg of the creek and about 30 yards north of the incident location. Footprints would not be possible in the creek as it was rock covered. The shoreline on both sides of the creek is generally very dense, native trees and vines, with the ground being covered by brush and leaves. Again, this area is not suitable for track impressions. Mr. Wilbanks began moving back from the sighting area on the west bank of the creek when he noticed a distinct human-like footprint in a muddy backwater stream bed. This track was photographed and cast, measured approximately 11 inches in length, 6 inches at the ball, and 4 inches at the heel. Oh boy, where's Agent ETA when you need him, right? Mr. Wilbanks reported that during the time he waited for the plaster cast to dry, he noticed movement in and around his location and heard a whoop sound. The movement consisted of sound of sticks being broken. About 35 minutes into the cast drying process, Mr. Wilbanks noticed a very strong, quote, dead animal smell, which lasted about 10 minutes and faded away. There was no wind, and he had not noticed this smell previously. Mr. Wilbanks departed the area with the cast and contacted Mr. Roberts, who proceeded to his location from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Upon Mr. Roberts' arrival, Mr. Wilbanks led Mr. Roberts into the area at 23:30 hours. Night vision was used to no avail, although on a couple of occasions movement was detected on the eastern shoreline. At one point, a large animal was flushed on a rocky and brushy shoal in the creek, but it was unidentifiable. This operation was terminated at 0300 hours. At 1200 hours, David Wilbanks and Roger Roberts proceeded back into the area where the cast was made and were able to find 4 more tracks with the same measurements. These additional tracks were within a few feet of the track which was previously cast, and one set had stride measuring 52 inches. No other evidence or activity as noted during this search, and the operation was terminated at 1700 hours, July 10, 2000. On July 22, 2000, David Wilbanks, and so that's 12 days later, on July 22, 2000, David Wilbanks and a volunteer associate returned to the Big Eagle Creek area and set camp at 1900 hours on the west fork of the creek and approximately 40 yards due west of the witness's sighting location. The campsite was about 100 yards south of the area where the tracks were located. David stated that about 2200 hours they both heard what sounded like a person walking along the rocks on the east fork of the creek. It stopped walking and started turning over rocks in the creek, and they could hear the rocks splashing and striking other rocks. This activity ceased after about 10 minutes, and they believed their presence was discovered at that point. At this point, it started walking along a dry stream bed toward them. It was definitely a large animal on 2 legs. It would pace back and forth, but stayed just out of flashlight range. This lasted about 45 minutes, then it seemed to leave the area. At about 2400 hours, it returned and repeated this behavior for another 15 minutes. After that, the sounds ceased for the last time. No visual sighting was made and no smell was noticed. No tracks were found the next morning as the terrain was very rocky and brush-covered. A BFRO note, Roberts and Wilbanks are currently gearing up for more stakeouts at this site with various types of imaging equipment. Now, that's really exciting that the investigators went out there and actually found reasonably good evidence of activity. Now, to be fair, if you've ever been in the woods, particularly at night, there are all sorts of strange sounds, and your mind can definitely play tricks on you. However, they did see interesting things in the area where the Bigfoot was seen. Just to entertain a skeptical perspective, it is possible, even in dense terrain, that there could be some kind of hermit-type person living out there, and I don't think... Now, 11 inches would be pretty pretty big, but I don't think that that's necessarily impossible to have somebody with an 11 foot long foot. Unlikely, yes. I think it's unlikely, but well, actually, no, actually, I'm measuring my foot right now, and it is in the ballpark of 11 inches. So just, yeah, I'm sitting here in my office measuring my foot. That's not weird. So I think actually that's a normal person-size footprint. So is it possible that there's some kind of hermit living out there that's what the person saw, the original witness saw? Because he said it could have been blue, and he thought originally that it was like some kind of coveralls. Well, what if the person was living there all alone for many years and didn't have shoes? They just walked around barefoot. I mean, it seems unlikely, it seems implausible, but it seems just as unlikely as a Bigfoot sighting, so I think it's worth considering. Either way, this was a really, really interesting case, and it's in the same general area as Honobia, so I thought it was worth mentioning. All right, what do we got here? All right, we got time for another one. This one was from 1999, and it was reported on February 11th, 2000. Once again, it's in LaFleur County, which is in the same general area as what we've been talking about here. Observed, I was deer hunting with a friend for whom I have known and hunted with for years. I was in my tree stand at about 9:15 a.m. when I noticed a shape emerging from the trees to my left. I then realized it was Scott. Hey, we don't need to name people here. Let's keep this anonymous, right? I noticed that there was something wrong with him because he was pale white. He was coming up the ridge extremely quick and was looking behind him at all times. I motioned to him thinking that he might have been startled by a big buck, but he let me know real quick that it was not so. Scott stopped at a stump to catch his breath and turned to look behind him once again. At this time, I became concerned, for I have never seen him this scared. He finally arrived at my stand, obviously extremely disturbed. I climbed down from my stand and asked what was wrong. He explained to me that something which I chuckled at. He told me that something was behind him and got very disturbed with his presence and started to stalk him in a very aggressive manner. He then stood up to see what was walking around him, when all of a sudden a horrible and terrifying yell shot through his body that shook him. He gathered his pack and proceeded to my stand. We talked and decided to investigate the situation due to the fact that we were camped half a mile away. What we found was very disturbing. Trees snapped in half at 9 to 10 feet high, some very deep indentations that were 12 to 14 inches long. Normally, that would be no big deal, except it had not rained for some time. We followed the tracks for 2 miles until they went into extremely dense foliage. I passed this as the jitters, but the next day I was stalked myself. So he was just having the jitters, but then he was stalked later that day. Also noticed there was a decrease of wildlife in the area, and it just did not feel right. Yeah, I can relate to that feeling. The Sonoma Developmental Center, for instance, you go there, it does not feel right. It could just be subconscious because the place is so weird and deserted, but who knows? So the terrain was very dense and extremely thick, with pine trees and mountainous terrain with rivers and streams. There's a follow-up by BFRO, investigator Al Moskowitz. I called on this report and talked to DM, the witness writing the report. That morning he felt like he was being watched. He originally thought that it might have just been his friend, but later determined that it wasn't. He also mentioned that he heard the thing walking through the woods and that his marine training allowed him to recognize the fact that the creature that he was hearing was walking on 2 feet and not 4. Well, I don't know if you need marine training for that, but sure, why not? The two of them found broken branches and the impressions in the ground. These impressions were in pine needles. They were deep, As he mentioned in his report, it had not rained for a while, and he was impressed by how deep the indentations were in the ground. He mentioned that this entire incident scared him quite a bit. Something watched him for 3 days. It maintained a distance and stayed on the downwind side of him the whole time. He found this very disquieting. He is 6 foot tall and weighs over 220 pounds. He is an ex-Marine. He indicated very clearly that nothing much scares him under normal circumstances. Yeah, 6'2", 220 pounds, former Marine. Yeah, that is not a scared person. That is a scary person. But this time he was terrified. His friend Scott did hear a loud, unbelievable scream behind him during this set of incidents. Then he heard something break a tree 6 to 7 inches thick up about 8 feet. Nothing else was seen or heard. As mentioned in the report, they went together later and saw the broken tree. This area is 2.5 hour drive from where this guy lives. He lives in Oklahoma City, and this is near the Arkansas-Texas border. During this whole time, he never saw the creature. He had something walk around him that night as well, but this might have been a bear. Yeah, and I think it's possible that this whole sighting could have been a bear. I'm not saying that's the case, but I think it's interesting at the very least to, toss around different possibilities. What if, with a lot of these Bigfoot sightings, there are so many reports and a lot of them seem genuine that I'm not convinced that all of these are made up. I think it's possible that some of them could be made up, maybe even many of them, but I doubt all of them are. And I think it's also possible that a lot of these could be caused by bear sightings. Bears can be extremely large. The largest bear that I'm aware of is the polar bear, which can reach 12 feet in height on occasion, although from what I understand, that's rare. Let's say hypothetically there was, a mutant bear out there somewhere who was unusually large. Just think like any species, like humans, for instance, there could be a range of size even for one species. So just like you could compare, as I've said before, Mini-Me versus Shaquille O'Neal, same species, very, very different heights. So if that's possible for a bear, what if there are some outliers and there could be some very tall bears out there, and bears can walk on 2 feet if they want to? Seems unlikely, and I'm not saying that that's the case for everything, but if we want to take a skeptical viewpoint, I think some of these sightings could be explained by something like that, particularly during a sighting when they don't have any actual visual contact with what it is that they're hearing out there in the woods. Either way, this is a really interesting sighting, and I thought it was worth mentioning on the show. All right, let's do one more before we wrap it up. This sighting was more recent, from 2010, and it's from McCurtain County, which is the county just south of what we were talking about before. Same general area, but a little bit farther away. So it was submitted April 8th, 2020, and occurred on August 14th, 2010. I was with a friend of mine behind his grandma's house. We had seen some dead fish near a pond, broken in half, so we went back later that day to look to see what might have caused it. Now, just as an aside, there are many, many cases of big feet around rivers and lakes looking for fish, trying to find fish to eat. So this is one of the more common things you see. And again, it just sort of adds to that whole carnivore idea. So these are not necessarily herbivores. We went about 100 yards in the woods when my friend had to go use the bathroom, so he walked away from me when I heard a noise off to the right. I looked and see something. I looked and saw something looking around a tree at about 50 to 75 yards away. I could make out fur on the outline of the shape. It looked like it was about 8 feet tall. I saw it take a step, and then I took off running back to the house. I was the only one that saw it. He just noticed me running back to the house. He was using the bathroom. I guess he's talking about his friend there. Other stories? No. Time and conditions? was around 6. It was dusk just before nightfall. Environment, it was a hardwood forest near a pasture for cows and a pond about 50 yards from the tree line. There was a follow-up investigation, it says here, by Carter Bouchard. Spoke with the witness via phone. He's a police officer. His report is, I don't think so. not with the language and grammar used in this report. I was correcting it as I read it, but there's a lot of typos here. I suppose it's possible there are police officers out there that have typos, but from what I understand, there are very high standards for that, because if you have a lot of typos and miswordings in your police report, that won't stand up in a court of law. So they have to be pretty careful the way they write reports. So I guess it's possible, but, whatever. His report is brief, but factual. He and a buddy had gone to a family pond and found numerous fish broken in half on the bank. That's weird, though. Why would a Bigfoot break a fish in half and then leave it there? I suppose I've heard that bears will kill something and kind of let it sit there and get kind of gamey and let it kind of progress to be rotting a little bit before they eat it because they like the flavor better, maybe. So I've heard that maybe big feet do that too. Maybe a bear broke these fish in half. Who knows? So let's see. On the bank, they were bones. Oh, they were bones only. Okay, so yeah, that makes a little bit more sense. They were bones only and no meat was left, but they were broken nearly perfectly in half and just left on the bank. They were not stepped on. The skeletons were intact, and the supposition was they were cut or broken upon catching them, and the bones or carcass were dropped on the spot. They had not been moved as far as they could tell. If you ate a fish, though, I don't think the bones would be intact because fish bones are not very sturdy, right? I don't know. It's weird. It's a weird one. After about half an hour, his buddy had run behind some trees to relieve himself. While he was waiting for him to return, he heard a noise. He looked over in the direction of the noise and saw the creature. It was standing behind a tree which did not fully hide it. It did the standard tree peeking, but moving from one side of the tree to the other. It then stepped back, took a stride to the right, and became fully exposed. Ooh, boy. That is when the witness took off running back towards his friend's grandma's house. The color was, quote, dark reddish brown, and brunette somewhat sums the color up. There was a low hanging branch on the tree, and it checked out later, and 8 feet in height is accurate. The entire event lasted around 15 seconds. He sat on this for at least 10 years, and being in a small town, he did not want the attention or the ridicule he knew was coming. His dad had been on him to come forward, and he finally did. Good for him. I could sense it was relief. It was a relief. In that story, I don't want to call out anybody as being a hoax. I didn't screen this one ahead of time. The others I screened ahead of time. This one I did not. We just had a few extra minutes here, so I figured I'd grab another report. There are a couple of things about this story that kind of make me skeptical. For instance, a police officer not knowing how to use proper grammar and so forth. Also, the fact that they waited so long to report it. And I don't know, a couple of other details here are just sort of getting my spidey senses tingling. It just, I don't know. Just this one doesn't really seem to add up a whole lot to me, with the fish and everything. But who knows? I'm not necessarily saying it was fake. I'm just saying this one seems less plausible than some of the other stories that I've heard. All right, well, that about wraps it up for this time with Bigfoot, with the the siege at Honobia and a couple of other Bigfoot reports. I always like doing some Bigfoots. It's a really interesting topic, and it's fun to imagine what else could be out there that has yet to be discovered. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit more in the after hours about the BFRO report for the siege at Honobia. But if you don't have the after hours, if you're not subscribed to the Patreon, well, get on there and check it out. If not, this stuff is all readily available online anyways, so go ahead and take a peek at it yourself. All right, thank you guys so much for listening, and until next time, keep it strange.